Hello and welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. I am your producer, Jacob. Today's episode is brought to you by that one Walmart in Taos, New Mexico that made the recording of this possible. This is our first ever IRL, everybody sitting in the same room episode. It features our extra cousin, Matt Gertken, and myself, although obviously I don't say shit. And it presages a ton of content in the pipeline, including a very fun, dark, interesting few episodes with Peter Zeihan. That's all I got. Enjoy the episode.
This is our first in-person recorded Geopolitical Cousins episode. We are in Taos, New Mexico, at Matt Gertken's lovely home. He's offering us this. Also, for posterity's sake, you should know we recorded all of this on June 15th, 2026. We're going to try and keep things relatively evergreen, but, there's stuff in the news. We have peace with Persia. We had a gladiatorial match in front of the White House. It's the emperor's birthday. Yes, I'm talking about the United States, not ancient Rome. But here we are. So Matt, cousin.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Matt, for hosting us.
Always welcome here.
Wonderful place. Actually, for all the fans of Geopolitical Alpha, I just want to say I actually wrote first 3 chapters of the book in this very room where we are right now, because Matt let me stay and get some of this altitude and this great mountain air, and it's very inspirational. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, this place is special because apparently during the Iraq War, Martin Hoffman, who was previously the Secretary of the Army, and he was sort of a bluegrass guy and he liked the mountains. He was a poet. He leaves the White House in D.C. and he comes out to be in Taos. He wanted to turn this all into a big condominium. And the neighbors chose to sell it to my family instead because they weren't fond of selling to one of Donald Rumsfeld's.
A war profiteer.
Warmonger. So I don't think he was a bad guy, actually. The guy.
Well, clearly he likes Taos.
Yeah, he likes Taos.
Cool, chill dude. That's awesome. A warrior point.
It's just the eternal return of the same. 20 years later, we're at war in the Middle East again. Yeah. Basically nothing has changed. Instead of Donald Rumsfeld, we have crystal meth Rumsfeld, Pete Hegseth. It's all basically the same thing. So maybe they'll come for your house next. I don't know.
Yeah, that is one thing about this war, is that there had been, as we've all talked about many times, this belief that the U.S. would pivot to Asia and withdraw from the Middle East. And what we see is that the U.S. just has the capability to intervene in different places. And so the probability goes up that they will do that at different times.
Yeah. There's the old, I forget, is this Shakespeare or whatever? History repeats itself. First is tragedy, then is farce.
I think that's Marx.
Is that Marx? What is the third time?
Yeah.
Because we need to start.
Yeah, the farce of it's a tragedy.
As apocalypse.
Yeah.
Anyways, we gotta wait for Peter for that. So
yeah, we'll wait for Peter for that. Okay, we could talk about Iran because we have a deal. Maybe we have a deal, but we've been talking about Iran so much. We were just talking before that we're sick of talking about Iran. And I think we should start by talking about artificial intelligence. And we're going to run through a couple different things in our conversation. But to give the listeners some backstory, we're going to talk about Anthropic versus the United States, but then maybe we back into some other things about artificial intelligence and see where the conversation takes us. Anthropic and the U.S. government have been butting heads for a while now. You might remember a couple months ago where the United States wanted Anthropic to loosen up some rules on how they were allowed to use Anthropic's software or agents or things like that. Anthropic was like, no. And the U.S. was like, fine, we fire you. We're going to go to ChatGPT and use all this instead. Pete Hegseth even said in a tweet, yesterday, good riddance for Anthropic. They're showing us, their true colors here. But what happened last week was on Friday, relatively late in the day, the United States put out basically an export control that said that no foreign national, either in the United States or outside of the United States, even an employee of Anthropic, can use Anthropic's new AI models, Mythos and Fable. We are not AI experts. You are probably not AI experts. The things you need to know about this is that the Mythos model apparently can just break any different software that you're thinking about. It's really, really good at finding software vulnerabilities and breaking them. And Anthropic and the U.S. government were so freaked out by Mythos that they prevented it from being rolled out, established this project called Project Glasswing to prevent people from getting access to it. And Anthropic had to work for weeks to get rid of some of the vulnerabilities. They thought they'd gotten rid of the vulnerabilities. They announced it to great fanfare, and the U.S. government says, actually, no, you're not allowed to do that. And Anthropic, in order to comply with this order, I mean, how are you supposed to figure out if foreign nationals are using it or not? They basically just said, no, like we can't do it for anyone. We're suspending all access to these models going forward. Now, today, Anthropic is going to talk to the US government. They say it's a misunderstanding. They're using this phraseology that there was a jailbreak. So somebody was able to use Fable to get to the dangerous parts of Mythos that they were trying to block them from. And this is the reason that the US government cracked down. But Anthropic is sort of scratching its head being like, hey, we thought we were working together. Like, why didn't you just all this stuff going on? The last thing I'll just say is that this is very rich because Anthropic has been one of the AI companies leading the charge for more US government intervention, more US regulation, pushing the US to have an AI model that combats China and its AI models because AI is so important for the liberal, democratic, free world, and Anthropic is going to be the tip of that spear. And here, the tip of the spear is saying, and actually there's an export control that you can't actually use this, psych. And they were like, whoa, we said regulate AI, but we didn't mean regulate us. So I throw out all of that context to say, and we'll set, I want to set it up this way, which is, it seems to me there's an emerging conflict between AI companies and the state. That the state is looking at AI companies and sees a challenge to sovereignty, sees a challenge to its power, sees a challenge to the monopoly on force within its borders. And we have this kind of emergent showdown. I wanted to throw out that grenade to both of you. And we've all been using AI more, I think, in recent months. How does that ring true for how you're thinking about geopolitics? Is this overblown? Like 3 days from now, will this content be overtaken by events and we should have talked about Iran first? Is this actually something we're going to see evolving over time? And is this part of a US versus China versus EU versus other AI models out there? Let's just start talking about AI and see where we go.
I mean, that's where I would have taken it. I think when you think about 19th century industrialization, nationalism, nation states, state building, it's all about scale. It's all about putting scale to work. That's what industrialization is. You put a bunch of peasants off the fields into factories. You got to educate them. You got to explain to them why it's better not to get fresh air and toil inside of a terrible place. You got to educate their kids. You got to brainwash them so that they believe they're Frenchmen or Americans or Italians or whatever. And all of that was created to feed the machine of basically the end of feudalism. Our means of productions changed, and therefore ideologies and the superstructures on top of them changed with them. And that's, a very Marxist way to think about the world, but I kind of subscribe to that. That was from feudalism to what we got with capitalism, from feudalism to nation states. The technologies changed that allowed you to actually scale up. We suddenly had the technologies to do that. Now, what's interesting about not just AI, but every technological innovation we've got is it's allowing you to be quite competent even if you don't have scale. So drones replace men with guns. So maybe you don't have to educate millions of people to believe in the Pledge of Allegiance because you're not going to need them in a trench warfare. You're going to have drones. AI allows you to scale without the humans. I mean, that's what it is, right? It's like right now it's a junior analyst. Maybe in 10 years, it's one of us. And so by definition, I think that this new means of production is going to undermine the superstructures that we have created on the previous means of production. And so, yeah, I absolutely think that where this is going, whether it's drones, robots, AI, is that the emerging political, geopolitical, cultural, pop cultural, family, religious superstructures are going to be different in 10, 20 years.
Yeah. It's one of those examples of how it's almost like technology is the main character of the story and we're the scenery and we're getting disrupted or changed rather than, where we typically view it as humans being in charge and using the tools. Because the tools change and the society has to accommodate. And everyone is running around having conversations like, what do we do about AI? Or shouldn't we be appalled about this? Or shouldn't we prevent our kids from using this? But the truth is we're all just victims of this change. But it does impact ideology. I mean, I think you can see from the share of the economy that's growing as a result of building data centers and all this, that there's a big economic incentive. There's not a lot of other parts of the economy that are growing. So the state wants to get in on that. But they also have to get in on the security and strategic angle that you mentioned. And then finally, ideology. I mean, what happens if AI tells the youth, tells young people, tells people who are learning that the Constitution is a poorly written document, badly designed government system? You know what I mean? So that increasingly people find that the beliefs that are supposed to be fundamental to like a shared nationhood, especially like in the US or anywhere that's a modern state where it's not supposed to be determined ethnically or determined based on your nationality. It's really an idea that you share. Well, now that idea is going to be disrupted. So we're going to have culture wars about whether we should have organic ideas or whether we should allow artificially intelligence generated ideas to govern ourselves.
I brought this up last time, a couple of podcasts ago, actually. Like you went there. I talked about Gen Z and, Alpha generation. It's the first generations really in human history where the monopoly of like church school parents, or like, sorry, that's not a monopoly, it's a oligopoly. There was an oligopoly over your children's brains. Like you get to brainwash them. And then you choose like, let this priest brainwash him. Okay, that sounded weird, but like, let's leave that aside.
Preacher or
You
whatever.
know what I mean? That could go sideways. No diddy on that one. But like, and then, so my point is, you had an oligopoly over your children's brains. And then for the first time, once you give an iPad or a screen to your kids, and everyone's like, I'm not going to have my kids have screens. Like, good luck with that, by the way, good luck. They will find them. And boom, suddenly the monopoly is broken. And that really matters for nation states. Like 90% of people watching this think that, they're American or French or Italian because they are. Okay. No, because you've been brainwashed since you were like 5 years old that you are. You can very easily be brainwashed into all sorts of other things. And I think, and I mean, I'm making it sound like very negative. I think there's positives here too. But the point of all of this is, going back to what Jacob read to us, is that the US government is telling Anthropic, you're going to do A, B, C, and D to prevent this from happening. And that just sounds like, I don't know, the feudal lord telling his peasants like not to read.
Well, this was actually my exact question that I'm wrestling with, because it's not just like, this is just one example, but you might remember a couple months ago, Australia said no social media for kids under the age of 16.
Yeah.
The UK just said
Just not.
blanket ban on social media for anyone under the age of 16. How do you enforce that?
How do you define that social media?
Well, they said they defined it. It was YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all that other stuff. But things like Signal and WhatsApp, that's okay because they're messaging. So then those things probably just migrate there.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the point is they're not going to be able to stop it, right? But just like you don't stop kids from smoking cigarettes or getting alcohol, they're going to get their cigarettes and they're going to get their alcohol.
Yeah.
But as you put in those barriers, you make it a little bit harder. And just by doing so, maybe you create some kind of, scaffolding.
We had a client come in. That's true. We had a client and write in, shout out to Paul. He watches us religiously. And he said, no. He did some research, he asked AI probably, but like, God bless you, Paul. Well done. But I was like, here is how the US government will be able to enforce that non-US nationals. There's like this long list of ways to do that. And I just got to say, I think that's just, it's, 20th century thinking, trying to prevent 21st century technology from seeping in. Like I'm a triple national as an example. Like, so I'm not going to be able to use this, or am I? Because I also have a US passport. It's like, there's too many permutations. I think it's.
But we should also recognize like the democratic societies have already broken all the idols. I mean, like you were referring to church, but I mean, we're way past the point where religious ideology has dominated society. It's been shattered. Secular ideology that was sort of state creed, most of that's also been broken up. We've seen, school systems. It's not as if public schools are totally in control. So in other words, across the democratic world, you already have pluralism. AI is going to add a new shattering of ideas and a new change in ideologies, but at least these societies are already used to coping with having all of their ideas blown up all the time anyway. So in a way, I mean, I still think there's going to be a lot of struggles, ideological struggles, but it's also societies that are familiar with ideological struggle. Whereas that's not the case. I think China, for example, will face a problem here because there'll be the proliferation of new ideologies, but they don't actually have the same, of course, on the household level, like average Chinese person can think anything they want. But in terms of integrating industry and the state and the behavior of the households generally, there is a closed ideological envelope, and that's going to be blown open by AI. And that means the state is going to try to control, the gateway to AI. And the US is going to want to do the same thing. And so you can see that there is going to be a fortification of AI systems, but the advantage that the democracies have is that all the different democracies can share and interrelate with their AI, but it might be states that are more ideologically closed that will limit access to democratic AI.
It's interesting you say that because, I mean, and again, I'm not an AI expert, so maybe I'm riffing off of your point incorrectly from a technical perspective, but China is the one that's like encouraging open source models, which is interesting.
Well, it's one of the ironic things is there's supposed to be a US-China meeting on AI safeguards, next week or 2 weeks from now? And, China can go in there and say, yeah, the US is the AI state. You guys are outlawing things with this model that, by the way, was leaked 3 weeks ago. We're already working on this. Like, we're not that afraid.
But this is...
Yeah, but I just question how long that's going to last, because what we've seen with all other forms of communication and media is that the state has a very heavy hand in controlling it.
That's fine, but maybe China begins it and Malaysia finishes it. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But one concern I have is that we in the US, I feel like when it comes to the AI models, we're very proud of our achievements. But it almost feels like Germans and their pride over their internal combustion engines. I'm just, what if you don't need Mythos? Maybe you need it in 2026. But what if you just need 75% of the way? Like, do you really need AGI? Do you need the best model?
No.
Or will you need
of course you
point A to point B?
I think you're right, but if Mythos exists, now somebody in their mom's basement can use it. And now the monopoly on force is no longer with the state. Like, if you can use Mythos to hack into the software that runs the water utilities or the nuclear power plant or the utility company or all the things that we depend on in life for a daily basis, like where does that go? And you can see how the state is going to come in and try and block that. And I think this in some sense comes down to a question of, do you think the state will win, or do you think the AI and the tech companies will win here? Because if it's door A and the state wins, it kind of takes us to a weird dystopian sort of V for Vendetta type world where the state is controlling some level of information. And the way they do that is not by stopping Mythos. It's the hardware. It's the chips and the access to power that powers the data centers. It has to be the physical infrastructure. But door B is something that we haven't really imagined, which is, okay, the tech companies win. So is that Blade Runner? Is that where Tyrell Corporation matters in Blade Runner and we don't hear about the state at all? The government is gone because the corporation is more powerful. And also because the corporation, going back to your Marxist point about the means of production, it also sort of takes us back to feudalism in a strange way. Because what AI is really doing is it's taking the proletariat, which was in the factory, you needed the worker in the factory, and the worker becomes powerful because you need those workers. We're all pretty much in the knowledge-based service economy right now. And so if AI, functions as allowing you to scale and fewer people can do the same amount of work, okay, well, what happens to the service knowledge economy proletariat? But they're gone, and then, takes us to a weird place.
It definitely does that. And to me, what it says is that the state will triumph because they will have, first of all, they'll have a lot of the corporate sector on their side, which is the side of corporations that are getting disrupted by the tech companies. But then also they'll have voters on their side, especially those that are dislocated from their employment. So to me, there is a critical mass already taking shape of voters who are, now they're not, there hasn't been a catalyst yet. And that's really key. There has to be a catalyst. So far people aren't actually getting laid off because of AI, not in mass. But when it happens, then the state's going to have this huge support of influx of public opinion. And then combined with the fact that there's companies worried about their cybersecurity and they're being disrupted by AI companies. So to me, it would be, these companies are going to plow ahead, and there is a state incentive to continue to be on the cutting edge of the technology. But then there's also going to be this counterweight, which is public and incumbent companies and the government all trying to make sure that they're corralled appropriately.
So corporate, the state. I want to take a third.
Yeah, take a third.
I think it's just going to be a free for all. So because
anarchic.
It's just going to be look, all of the technologies that we're talking about, all of the sinews of institutions are going to continue to exist. You're going to still have Congress. You're still going to have the US government. You're still going to have the European Union. You're going to still have a municipality, a county. But I think they're going to be less efficient, and the digital world is going to be more efficient. The corporates, you're still going to have the Amazons and the Googles and everything, but The problem that they have that I think is coming, and that I think the market is kind of whistling by the graveyard on this, is that, again, like, I just don't think you need top-notch American, US-made awesome models. Like, I think we're 5 years from some, like, you know, kid in Jakarta, like, being like, here's my open source model, you know? And so in that world, I'm not sure which of those two wins, which one crumbles more.
Yeah, well, also, of course, as you know, China, the roboticization of AI, they might be better at creating the industrial applications. They
Like on
certainly
the
are
edge.
so far, yeah.
But, you know, like, one thing that I think one of you said was energy. You know, like, there are certain things that, like, you're not going to be able to run from your home. I mean, like, you know, you're not going to have a nuclear reactor in the back. Like, it's just not going to happen. So, like, there's still limitations. You still need, like, you still live in a physical space where, you know, you're not going to be a complete free radical. But I just think that, yeah, we do need to start being very creative when you think about the future. Because I think that, again, just to kind of pull it to 60,000 foot view, you know, the means of production that enabled the last 150 years are dramatically changing. And it's funny to me that almost every technology that we're creating, almost every one of them is undermining the post-industrial world, you know, where you needed really to compete for scale. I mean, think about like things like medicine. How do we solve headaches? You create aspirin and you're like, okay, well, this is good for the median human. And what if it doesn't work for you, Matt? Well, too bad, like take two. So like everything, food production, like we're going to solve hunger by just, you know, increasing yields of rice. Well, I don't like rice. Well, too bad. You know, like nobody asks you. We're getting to a world where like customization, like more specific, like, oh, sorry, Matt, you got actually a special problem with your headaches, but you know, we can fix that because we know what your genetics are. The world where we're just like sort of dealing in scale is shrinking massively on every single level. And I think that's really interesting. I'm not completely sure where it goes, but I think that I do think this will be outdated, this conversation in 5 years, Jacob. Because, you know, in 5 years, the idea that government and Anthropic are fighting over this is going to be, I think, silly, because there's going to be 50 Anthropics. And the writ of the US government is going to be 50 times less capable of enforcing. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but that, I mean, I don't know where that takes us then. I mean, you're sort of talking about the death of nationalism, the death of liberalism, the death of communism. I mean, all of those things go away. I think, you know, China has been at the forefront of all of this in some ways. You know, the Great Firewall, you know, people thought it was a joke, and then suddenly people started copying it. You might remember, I mean, this was years ago now, but Jack Ma sort of thumbed his nose at the Chinese Communist Party, and Xi Jinping was like, okay, Mr. Thank you for volunteering to be made an example of. They sort of took maybe there'll be 50 Anthropics in China or whatever, 50 versions of DeepSeek, whatever those are. But Xi Jinping's already cut them down to size. He's basically said, no, there's the Chinese Communist Party, and then there are the people, and I'm going to have to deal with the people. So I'm going to have to figure out how to make them rich.
That's why I agree with Matt.
But his approach squelches innovation.
Exactly. That's what it was. Just, I want to follow up on what you said, which is you kind of danced around this, but like I do think that there is something called the Western civilization. You know, you can study it in college. It's a fact. And one of the things that is, I think, a hallmark of Western civilization is just being comfortable with like a high degree of messiness.
Yeah, pluralism, competition.
Messiness, like in all shapes, forms, and ways. Like the whole point of like a parliament, you know, like where people yell at each other. I mean, you know, in the Commonwealth, you still have people like literally yelling at each other across the aisle. Like it's hilarious. Like we have institutionalized like barroom brawls. City-states of Greece is kind of where I'm headed with this. And I think that we are just, I think culturally, historically, maybe religiously, I don't know. I mean, Matt, help me with this. You got, you know, this is what you're an expert at. But like, I think we're just like, in the West, far more actually comfortable with the cacophony that's going to come out of this, the messiness of it. I don't think that like, you know, countries that are trying to force their society into compliance and having a very strong state that don't have a very good history with weak states or weak state power or weak institutions because they just crumble into, you know, complete anarchy. They're the ones that are actually most critically at risk here. It's China that's at risk. I think America is just going to become like something like the Wild West, this Taos, New Mexico. Like read about history of Taos, New Mexico. Rebellions left, right, and center. There's like a graveyard where I think Billy the Kid is, who is it?
I think Billy the Kid's further south.
But yeah, somebody's like,
yeah.
somebody went through here, like, you know, I mean, this is the history of the West. The history of the West is not neat, nice, like, it's just institutionalized messiness.
Go back to what you said about liberalism.
Well, yeah, because I kind of want to push back on what you're saying, Marko, because I think part of Western civilization is liberalism. And yes, there is messiness, and we tolerate the freedom of expression and value of the individual over the collective, which is what makes it sort of messy. But another defining aspect of the West is we have rule of law. So yes, you can have institutional brawls, but there are rules. Even in the like, you know, you mentioned Billy the Kid or whatever, like just go to Breaking Bad and go to Better Call Saul. Like there are still rules even in the underworld. Omar said everybody's got to have a code. You know, that's a very Western civilization idea. Like even as I'm flaunting the law, I have a code and something to live by. But the world that we're talking about is sort of if the state declines and if your liberalism declines or the ideology that you're using to animate your society declines, then where are individuals and especially young people looking for meaning? And I don't want to step on this too much because I'll talk about a little bit about this later when we do our Peter End of the World episode. But rather than thinking of it the way you're thinking about it, think about the world becoming like Brazil or becoming like South Africa, where you have elites who are doing really, really well because they control the new means of production. They have the government in their pockets. They control them because they control the rails or they control the things that are actually helping us do things. And then there's this whole underclass, which instead of I have a job at a corporation, I have a pension, I have a 401k. If I do my job correctly, there will be structures for me and there'll be healthcare and there'll be social security. Gone. It's the hustle economy. You got to go on AI and figure out how to hustle it and make some money for these wealthy elites, and then you go get what you want. And so it's not anarchy, and it's not Western civilizational rule of law, and we believe in the, you know, dignity of the individual and all those liberal creeds. It's actually like the elite guys on top, and then a whole underclass that is competing for the crumbs and using for AI to compete for the crumbs. And like, what do individuals use, or like individual young people like use in that space? So that's why I say kind of the death of liberalism. Part of the deal of liberalism was, yeah, you get the right to life and liberty and property and to pursue these things and to have rule of law and to have rules and to have recourse when somebody does something bad to you. Now, I mean, to use the Wild West metaphor, there's no recourse. It's just like, what can you do for me lately? How can you, I'm like getting very dystopian. But.
Yeah, well, I mean, we may be getting ahead of ourselves. I'm not sure that AI is yet, like, you know, challenging. I mean, you're right. It's going to disrupt all the structures. But at the same time, then there'll be this massive backlash when rights are invaded. And it was specifically property rights. And again, it will be corporate, which is part of what you're pointing to. But the corporates will be able to motivate public opinion to help defend their property rights. And public opinion will also be attempting to defend their private rights as well, and you know, whatever those may be that are being disrupted.
Yeah, but public opinion is enjoying UFC fights on the White House lawn. This is bread and circuses.
Yeah.
Like, we're back.
I'm listening to Jacob, and I'm like, I want to invest in private security firms and massage therapists.
Yeah,
That's like what I'm. Yeah, you know, like those are the two things I want to.
Well, but this is also one of the things that AI does, right? Because it allows you to have scale, right? It's not going to get rid of the jobs, but it's going to provide opportunities who will service the elites. Like that's sort of the model that we're moving towards, rather than companies where everybody gets to be part of the company.
When I said city-states of Greece, you know,
well, one thing
wasn't far from that.
So I mean, when we go from we talk about Western civilization and these ideological systems that are seemingly unbreakable because they pervade all these different European countries over 2,000 years, etc. So the Greeks were broken up when they would reach those levels where the middle swath of the population had been eviscerated. But the oligarchy got kind of too big. Obviously, it wasn't bigger than the mass, but the mass was foisted down, and then the oligarchy was bloated and taking up too many of the resources. Then you would have, you know, usually some kind of revolt, anarchy, and then a tyrant would take over to restore order. And that's the process that the Greeks would always write about, and then was sort of, you know, revived by John Locke and the Americans. Okay, where are we in that dynamic? Where are we in that cycle? We're witnessing a democratization of production and a technological change. The oligarchy, and I mean, we're really talking about a few tech barons here, but they haven't yet, I mean, we see inequality at very high levels in the U.S.
No, I mean, I think you answered your question.
Yeah.
We're at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Because when you get new means of production, you accumulate massive wealth.
Yeah.
Because they're so like new and amazing, and they're like, but
we're not yet at the breaking point. Yeah.
Well,
well, that's the thing is
but I don't think there is a breaking point.
But if the middle class pushes back fast enough,
well, I mean, look, this is why
then you won't actually destroy the middle class.
To use Nassim Taleb's like term, anti-fragile, like I think that this is why I kind of think that when you think about what societies, what cultures are going to deal with this in an okay way, I do think it's the West, because it's an anti-fragile system.
Yeah.
Which is like, you got oligarchs, they accumulate massive wealth. You know, like we have this new like AI and drone serfdom. And then like, yeah, the serfs rebel. That's like the story of Western civilization. And then like the oligarchs are like, all right, fine, I'll pay for your healthcare.
Okay, but here's
You know,
tell me if I'm wrong about that. But in one
SpaceX Health. I mean, come on, like, right?
In one way, this already happened, because what we saw in the 2024 election, not to get into like party politics and elections, but it was that the tech barons favored the party that they thought there was a sort of libertarian resurgence in 2024. And in a way, it could support the view that let's delegitimize the notion of the state or raising taxes or redistributing wealth. It's very convenient for these tech moguls to do that at that time. But on the other hand, that's a moment that just happened. So cyclically, we actually should be coming up on a reverse or an inversion of that, which is actually saying it's an anti-libertarian moment and it is a pro-redistributionist moment. And that's
AOC.
And unless that's what I mean. And unless the tech moguls can somehow short circuit that.
But you know, Matt,
which I don't know that they can.
You know, Matt, what's popular in Silicon Valley amongst the Twitterati is this new basically notion that libertarianism is for the fools. Democracy is terrible.
Yeah.
We need a tech-induced autocracy. That's not real sex.
Post-liberal,
Yeah, this is what you talk about at like these cocktail parties where everyone's wearing a thin black leather jacket. Like they're all just the same, by the way.
Sort of, and it's except that Peter Thiel has exited stage left from the cocktail parties and says, I'm going to go do this in Argentina because the U.S. is...
Right, but here's what
I'm... even there, like...
You know, he may be right about that in the sense that if you're trying to create an autocratic, like an it would be an oligarchic autocratic society, right? And that doesn't make sense. An oligarchic authoritarianism.
Yeah.
You're trying to do that, and it's tech fueled, but you're operating in a country where people probably are already at their limit in terms of how much of it they're willing to take.
Like, I get it. I get why if you're a freshly minted billionaire in Silicon Valley, it sounds cool. It's just that, like, that's that scene from House of Cards, right? Was it House of Cards when Kevin Spacey is like, Raymond, you may have all the money, but I've got all the men with guns.
Yeah, exactly.
Men with guns. I do think maybe a swarm of drones could put down a serf rebellion. I just,
but the serfs are going to have drones. Like Ukraine is
That's my point. So that's my point.
Yeah, that's the thing.
My point is 75% of all the new technology is probably good enough. Like you said, Ukrainians are proving this. They're fighting a country that supposedly has infinite supply of labor, infinite supply of troops. Well, they've lost, like the Russians lost. So the Ukrainians were able to leverage drone technology to defeat something that mathematically we were all told by generals like they can't do. And then similarly with AI, I just don't think you're going to need Mythos in 5 years. I think you're going to need 75% of the quality of it or 80%. And at that level, you're absolutely right. I think that this is going to lead to a lot of disruption, but the societies that are going to be most disrupted are those that are not comfortable with that. I don't have a better word than just messiness.
Yeah, I want to riff on what you were saying, Matt, about, these tech companies, what they're doing. Like, and I forget the exact statistic, but I got it from Craig Fuller at FreightWaves. But if you look at the spend on data centers right now, it's approaching what we spent on the interstate highway system. And it's like 20 billion every 2 weeks, and it's just going to go up. So instead of connecting actual humans, we're just building more and more and more data centers. And the amount of like construction materials and things like that, that part of the economy is really booming, but everything else is going away. Meanwhile, the only actor that could really control that is the government. This is now a problem that is too big for markets. It's something that the government would have to step in and do. And I'm stealing this from Robert Caro. Robert Caro did a great job of when he did his biography on LBJ and Robert Moses, saying, look, we don't have to make this ideological. Historically, the government steps in a free market economy when there is a problem that is too big for the market to solve. His great example, this is rural electrification. If you just left rural electrification up to the companies, there would be no power in the countryside because there's no reason. So you have to have the government come in. But instead of the government sort of seeing that as its role with these tech companies or with these corporates, what is the government doing? It's not increasing Social Security or funding retraining programs or thinking about the safety net. It's saying we need $1.5 trillion for our military budget. And we need to have more data centers and all these other things. And we're going to create all these oligopolies. So you actually have a government that is completely not on the side, I think, of the worker. And that, I think, is the real, if you're thinking about where this goes in US politics going forward, there's going to be a space for that left-wing populist who says, y'all are in on the deal. It's time to come back to like new age Marxism updated for the knowledge economy, service worker, proletariat, because we're being left behind.
But it doesn't have to be Marxism.
And it doesn't have to be Marxism.
You know what I mean?
It has to not be Marxism. It has to take some of the flavor.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
what it really would be, it's Roosevelt. It's the bull moose party where you get the moguls in the room. And this is what you were saying earlier, that Anthropic thought they were part of this.
Yeah.
And it is going to be, there's going to be a lot of jostling. There's going to be people putting out cigars in each other's faces. And, but the point is that in this system, the political actor who can probably storm one of the parties the way that Donald Trump did, but actually use it for an antitrust type maneuver or a harnessing of these companies, but bringing the people along, that's going to be an immensely successful formula. And the way they'll do it is like electricity prices or whatever it is that's agitating the population. And they'll just blame the tech companies for doing that. And they'll say, well, look, we're going to have to redress this problem. But I imagine it will lead to boom and bust cycles in the innovation, in the expansion, because right now we're clearly in a government that's laissez-faire. We've got this big expansion and it's sort of like anything goes. It's going to be pulled back. But then after that, it's probably going to be unleashed again, because it would be hard for the state to fully wrestle these companies. And ultimately, we don't want them to, because again, in China, Xi Jinping got what he wanted, and he fully suppressed the corporates and the barons, the entrepreneurs. But now they're having an entrepreneurship problem. So
they are, but they also have an industrial economy that actually tries to, now maybe it'll fail, and maybe it'll blow up in their face. Like maybe the people will rise up because they're more well-connected. But look at how he's connected them. Look at how he's built economies of scales where people can actually interact with each other. Do you know how long it took me to get here from New Orleans? It should not have taken me that long.
Well, that's
but our infrastructure.
That's what's special about Taos. No, that's how we like it.
It's not special about Taos. You know how much time I spent on airplanes because all of our transportation infrastructure is so shitty? If we could just connect our major centers of production, which is all the more important in an AI economy, because we're spending more and more time with these agents and typing in on screens, and we've lost human agency and interaction. So one of the things China's actually done is say, okay, like we're going to build the high-speed trains and we're going to build all this infrastructure so you can interact with each other and go to your Tai Chi class with all of your friends and things like that, this is what George Kennan's whole thing was about. The real strength of the United States against the Soviet Union is we have bowling leagues and the Soviets have nothing. There's nothing there. Our social fabric is fraying and we're all in our basements thinking about what we're doing, whereas China at least has a chance of making life easier for the peasant. And
I don't know.
If the peasant gets a taste, maybe he comes with the pitchfork. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting, but the only thing, I think the riposte. The riposte is that they misallocate capital in massive ways.
Of course.
Whereas like...
But Jacob would argue that we do too with all the economy going towards data centers.
Yeah, and I would just say they're exporting that misallocation of capital to us, and we are all more than happy to go on Amazon and buy 5 widgets that were made in China.
True.
Because,
True. They're both true. Actually, the boom cycle is going to misallocate capital for sure. But it's private actors that do it, and they will suffer consequences.
Yes.
And so in a way, they'll be chastened. And meanwhile, other parts of the society weren't foisted or forced into participating in that misallocation. So they may actually be in better shape whenever the bust cycle comes. Although, unfortunately, where we are today, I don't think that's the case. Unfortunately, what we have today is most of the private sector is pretty burned out. The only thing going is this AI boom. And then when that slows down, then, we're going to have a recession.
I'm not sure you're going to need the government to do that. I think the market, market eventually will correct. And it'll be, like this happened. We've talked about this many times in the pod. The book, Engines That Move Markets by Alistair Nairn really outlines every technological boom leads to a capex cycle, leads to a bust.
Yeah.
It's fine. Like the world will go on. We'll have cheap data centers and we'll have cheap, I think, compute as a result of the boom and the bust. And that goes again to the point of our conversation. We keep landing at the same point. Anyone in a position of power is actually getting disrupted. I don't think anyone's being strengthened.
No, but also though it brings us back to the Gilded Age and Roosevelt, et cetera, because what the one advantage we have today is that we have witnessed a period of American history where there was these huge capex explosions, and then these frequent retrenchments, and then populism. We've seen all this before, but I think that's actually an advantage of the U.S.
Well, that's what I go back.
Yeah,
like I just think that a lot of the reason that the median Chinese person is happy is because they've seen this progress over the last 20 years. And the reason that the median American is kind of like in a rut and like hates their life and everything and thinks the world will end is because, it's been, like America, it's hard to go up from the levels that it's at. But that doesn't
mean inequality.
Right. Well, but again, like income inequality of the U.S. and China are pretty similar.
Yeah.
Like, which is both an indictment of both of them.
Yeah. Perfect.
And sort of like, But what am I getting at? I'm just getting at the fact that, what the prevailing sentiment is in the country doesn't really impact my analysis that much. I still think that the median Chinese person who's happy could be wrong. What's coming in China is a lot of disruption because of these technologies that have been unleashed that undermine power. They just like undermine power. Whereas in the US, I think the median American who's out there like, falling asleep to Fox News and like just being like, oh my God, the world's ending, could also be wrong. Because like, in America, if you disrupt power, it's not anarchy on the other side. It's just like, meh. It's like what you said.
Happens all the time.
It happens all the time. Like, everyone's got guns. It's fine. Like, it will sort itself out.
All right, well, I feel vindicated starting with AI because we wouldn't have gotten here with this depth if we'd started with Iran, but also feel like I've done a bad job because we're like 50 minutes in. But so I want to back into one other thing I want to talk about, and then we'll get into some more explicitly geopolitical things in Iran and some of the others. But I'm going to read a sentence or two from a Syracuse University statement here, talking about why they're not going to make their budget this next year and some of the pressures behind them. So the headwinds confronting higher education are significant. Competition for students is now more intense than at any time in modern U.S. history. International undergraduate and graduate applications are also down significantly, driven by visa difficulties, geopolitical pressures, and federal policy disruption. So they said Beetlejuice, we have geopolitical disruptions. Okay, that's now affecting Syracuse University's bottom line. I bring it up at the end of our AI conversation also because I think universities are also struggling with what we're talking about. And this is supposed to be the bastion in some sense of ideas of Western civilization. Like this is self-serving because I went to Oxford, but Oxford is maybe the first institution in England that sort of safeguards the ideas of Western civilization in a way. You might have seen Berkeley is not allowing AI at all on campus. It's going to be a no AI campus for its students. University of Chicago pivoting the other way. They're going to provide access to Anthropic to all of their, I forget if it's undergraduate or graduate or both. So two completely diametrically opposed models here. And then also Syracuse talking about geopolitics and the lack of U.S. students in their system, talking about how they can't make budgets and what that's going to mean for other universities. So I thought we might end the AI conversation there by talking about one of the few institutions that might actually be able to offer some ballast in a world that is changing that way and yet is also exhibiting all of the same warning signs that we're talking about and is not of one mind of how to deal with AI.
So I can be pretty polemical on this topic. So the best example of what should be done is the original academy, the Greeks, right? Open debate, open inquiry, verbally, in person. And this can be done. This can be implemented. And by the way, exams, you just do blue books. You don't have a computer, right? So, or you have an oral exam. So
in Europe, that's what you do. Like in Serbian universities, had I gone.
So I don't see this as a threat to higher education or critical thinking, and if anything, it actually could be liberating in some ways. I think if the universities want to produce students that are Luddites and ideologically restricted, then they should ban AI. I think what they'd be better off to do is just recognize that it's a tool, and I think U.S. universities specifically gained a lot of dominance globally because they incorporated technology. They weren't afraid of it the way that a lot of European universities tried to adhere to a more, medieval and pretty religious, but basically ideological model. So to me, Chicago and some other free market oriented universities are going to prevail on this struggle. But it does obviously require some policing because you don't want kids to be faking what they're doing by just asking AI. The only other thing I would say is the U.S. system has been mismatched with industry. And this has been going on for decades prior to AI. So if AI disrupts the university system, to me, that's probably a good thing, because it'll help to perpetuate the thing that we've seen just in the last few years, where universities are actually starting on a more individual basis or maybe a state level basis to try different things, to experiment and to try to see how they can attract students and how they can match with industry better than adhering to what was basically a national model that I think was failing. But like I said, I'm very polemical on the topic.
I agree with everything you said. I mean, I think AI kind of levels the field of IQ. You know, it's like an aid to help you with your IQ, problems. It kind of levels the field. And it also disrupts a lot of the, I think, fields and expertise we've over-professionalized. Like, do you really need an MBA when AI can spit out quite a lot of stuff that like a normal MBA would have done? But it increases I think it increases the value of two things: critical thinking. Like, you got to have creativity to vibe code. If like all you know about finance is what you learned, studying for a CFA, like, bye. It was fun having you in our epistemic community. So that's one. Like, you got to be creative, and that is not something you will learn necessarily in a STEM program. That will come from the degrees that everybody was making fun of, like anthropology or sociology or philosophy, like those. So that, and also EQ. That's something you said many times, Jacob. Like, just EQ is going to matter more. So creativity and EQ, I still think between the ages of 18 and 22. You probably need to be at a university setting, like you said, like the old Greek way, in order to actually get better at those two.
Well, that's the thing I wanted to push on and to sort of close out on, which is, and I'm going to paint with a very broad brush here, and I'm sure, Matt, you'll pick this apart a little bit, but the first phase of US universities are very elitist. These are the patricians, the rich people, the elites send their kids to university so that they can have those patrician positions or be leaders, corporate leaders, government leaders, everything else like that. After the baby boomers come home from World War II, suddenly everybody needs to go to college. And so we get the GI Bill, and it becomes part of society that, everybody goes to college, and that is supposed to prepare you for the job market, for culture, for EQ, for all these other things. And that, I think, is what you're talking about, which is broken down. We no longer have, product market fit between what the universities are producing and what the market actually needs from them. If we go this direction, and if we have fewer numbers of Americans anyway who are going to university, do we go back to a patrician-style university where actually not everybody needs to go get a college degree, where we need more plumbers and welders and data center builders and artisans and all these other things, and you go to, trade schools or apprenticeships and things like that, and you stay at the university for the people who can really do the critical thinking? Because, AI is going to balance IQ, and only the people who can really be creative in that sense belong in university to do the critical thinking. Or is the university, are we still trying to democratize access? Are we still saying that every American student should go? And if we are saying that, there are this is where demographics are unavoidable. We have decreasing numbers of American students. So some universities, like a Syracuse University, they're not all going to be able to survive. And then there's this amazing competition that's probably going to take place between them. And how does it go? But I wanted to end with that question. Do you think we go back to elitist universities, or that the universities can reshape themselves to be still a laboratory of?
Can't it be both? I mean, I've got some really good friends of mine, who are in the construction industry, like carpenters, scaffolders. They went and got a 4-year degree. Now, you might say, well, they wasted their time. I don't think so. I think it made them a more well-rounded individual. Like, again, between the ages of 18 and 22, if you get, what I'm saying is maybe it can be both. Maybe.
Well, especially if the universities themselves gear themselves toward different things. You know what I mean?
And drop prices, by the way.
Yeah.
That's what that tells me.
Yeah,
that's true.
They better drop some, who's paying $90,000 a year to go to Syracuse, by the way. I got a couple of thoughts about that.
So that's similar to what I would have said is there'll be this upper tier where there's still this invaluable social signaling, Oxford, whatever, Harvard. That will probably be very patrician, and maybe even more patrician.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it'll go back to the way that it used to be, where very few people actually got to go there. Mm-hmm. But then there'll be this middle swath of the state universities that absolutely have to re-gear themselves toward industry, because otherwise they won't be able to justify all of their facilities and operations to taxpayers. But the U.S. is just lucky because we also have junior colleges and we also have liberal arts colleges and all that. So there's this oversupply. There's probably going to be some consolidation, but there's also this opportunity to experiment and like re-gear each institution to more vocational or less vocational, more creative. And more creative could actually become, like it used to be like, at least when I was growing up, you would sort of clown on somebody who went to art school because it was like, I didn't, but that, people would do that. They'd be like, oh, you're going to art school. What are you going to do with that? That's going to cost a fortune and then you don't have a job. But it may actually not work that way if AI is creating an even more exquisite service sector where, people can do whatever they want because a lot of the basic needs are being met through an enhanced productivity.
Yeah, one thing AI I don't think will ever have is taste.
Yeah.
So if you can like actually create art that like moves people, you'll actually be probably more valuable.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about Iran. It is June 15th. It's the middle of the day. I think, we could follow, is there a deal? Is there not a deal? Israel says it doesn't agree to the provisions of the deal not to strike Lebanon. Trump has been, insulting Netanyahu both to his face and in the media. Iran is claiming victory. They're going to have a toll. I want to get away from all that because hopefully this content stands a little bit the test of time. We're in the end game. Is it this deal? Is it a deal a month from now? It's clear to me that we're in the end game and that this is not going to go on continually and that we're much closer to the end than the beginning of this. So I thought the way we could structure this, and we can obviously allude to, what's happened with the deal and what has come out of it. What has changed? What hasn't changed? What does this mean for Iran? What does this mean for the Middle East? What does this mean for the United States? What does this mean for Asian countries? Like China in particular. To me, China might actually be the big winner in all of this, but I won't step on that too soon. As we sort of get into the end game here, if this was your final word on this conflict, like where do we go?
I think Marko should go first because your concept of kinetic equilibrium has sort of played out here.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, like I think we all like cognitively are really not comfortable with like the in-between world, the grays. We all look for binary outcomes, for definitive outcomes, for ones and zeros. Sometimes the world is a index from 0 to 10. I've said this many times on our podcast, and I don't think this is the end game. So I think the U.S. and Iran and Israel are in a hate triangle. It's like the opposite of a love triangle, and I think that one thing we know for sure with what just happened over the last couple of days. This is what we know for sure. We know for certain that the US and Iran are not comfortable with closing the Strait of Hormuz for the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like that has been proven definitively factual. Iran, as many thought, many Twitterati and many, like in the world thought that Iran was just going to cause a giant recession.
I mean, I did,
Well, no, but like,
I thought they were going to shut it down,
But they did shut it down.
Yeah.
So you got that right. I mean,
Yeah.
but the point is that once they shut it down, they're never going to open.
Yeah.
They're comfortable with like people starving in India.
Oh yeah, right now.
Like,
there always had to be a limit.
Yeah, there's a limit. So that proved to be correct. And America too, like obviously, well, I mean, President Trump proved that he wasn't really willing to go all the way. And so that's, I think, the one thing we learned definitively, that the two sides don't want to be blamed by the rest of the world as having caused, what I jokingly call the canisters and cannibalism recession. So, okay, we know that now. But does that mean that this is over now and then US and Iran are going to sing kumbaya? I don't think we have a framework for that. I actually think that folks out there who connect the Strait of Hormuz with kinetic action are just wrong. We can actually have a renewed fighting in many forms, either Israel on Iran, 1v1, or maybe, Israel versus Iran with US stepping in. We can have that in the future. It doesn't necessarily it's not going to always mean that Hormuz is going to be shut down right away or permanently or for a long period of time. And I think that hopefully that's something that, people start realizing. We're just living in a messy world like the 1980s. And we've referred to the Iran-Iraq historical example many times when you had a much worse war, millions of people died. And in the 1980s, there were constant attacks against tankers, constant, and yet oil got through enough of it. And so that's just the world we lived in. So that's the first thing. In terms of the long term, what does this all mean? I think what it all means is, I think countries need to start looking out for themselves. I think that's the big message. If you are in the region like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, one of the things we've been finding out as we're coming closer to the deal point, One was the UAE was starting to unfreeze some banking assets that Iran held. There was a Reuters exclusive on this.
Yep.
Was that done with tip of the hat by the US to grease the wheels of the deal? Probably. But, like some of the like saber rattling at the beginning of the conflict that was reported in the media where regional allies of the US were cheerleading the Trump administration to take it all the way. You guys remember that?
Yeah, top of the regime.
Yeah, that seems to have been snuffed out really quickly.
Yeah.
It seems like Qatar definitely made a deal with Iran.
Yep.
The fact that they denied it tells me that they probably did. And it's just, I think you're just in a world where it's not like America is failing because you can't rely on America. I mean, the fact of the matter is you can't rely on anyone. You gotta rely on yourself. And I think that's the big message here. The big winner is not China. I think the big winner is like Ukrainian drone companies.
Whoa.
It's Saab that makes Gripen, in Sweden. It's South Korean, anti surface to air missile systems. It's the in-betweens that are going to benefit, because now if you're sitting in the United Arab Emirates, if you're sitting in Saudi Arabia, or if you're sitting anywhere else in Malaysia or in Vietnam or Indonesia, any critical sort of part of the world, you got to start diversifying, because you just cannot really rely on absolutely anybody. You cannot rely on the Americans because they start a war and then you're like, yeah, let's go. And then they're like, psych. We actually have a really low pain tolerance, like really freaking low. And then you can't also rely on China, because I bet you anything. You and I got into a debate about this on this podcast. Where's China?
Oh, and
I'm
coming. Don't worry.
Where's China? Like, people were probably calling up Beijing saying, like, can you do a little bit more? I've got helium shortages. I got urea shortages. Where are you? Mm-hmm. So you got to rely on yourself. I think that's the big takeaway from this.
All right. I'm going to let you go, Matt, and then I'm going to...
Well, I'll try to keep it short. I mean, I think one thing is definitely we've seen the U.S. doesn't have the resolve to see through some initiatives. I mean, it's pretty clear the public immediately rejected the war. The president immediately had to sort of pirouette and try to back away from the war. And in a way, he was smart. I mean, he didn't put boots on the ground, and he retreated from an extended conflict. So he's reading what the public is saying. But it also tells everyone in the world that, like, the U.S. has a few things that they're willing to attack and hit you on, and you probably don't want to get hit by the U.S. because it's going to be really ugly. Like, the top military and civilian leadership of Iran were annihilated on the first day. So you don't want that to happen to you if you're a decision maker. But at the same time, you know that you do want an Iranian strategy or Iran-style strategy of endurance and, like choke points, because that can probably see you through, given that the U.S. has such a low attention span. And then finally, there is something that I think, and people throw tomatoes at me, but in the end, what is Iran going to get? Well, they're probably going to have to forswear highly enriched uranium, but they may end up getting the ability to continue to enrich uranium on their soil, maybe. And so the criticism in the U.S. context will be like, well, then all of this was just a waste of time because we had the Obama deal, et cetera. But on the other hand, the U.S. demonstrated that it really cares about nuclear proliferation. We will wipe out the top tier or top two tiers of your government if you're trying to violate this global non-proliferation regime.
Can I double click on two things?
Yeah.
And 6 weeks of bombing.
Yeah.
That is not light.
Right.
And second of all, like, how many other countries sit astride an incredibly unique piece of geography that gives them the kind of leverage Iran does?
Yeah, they don't have that leverage. Right.
So, like, if you're sitting there right now in like some rogue nation, like, yeah, baby, I'm next. It's like, well, okay, do you control 30% of all LNG transports and 20% of oil? No, then you should probably just be quiet and make a deal with the U.S.
Right. And so what happened, so that when North Korea got the nuclear weapon, then what that revealed is that there was no global police, there was no non-proliferation regime. The American state clearly resented that. And I think that's one reason that the state moved against Iran. Now, maybe the state will not succeed in preventing Iran from enriching uranium entirely, although it's still possible that Trump could get that. I think that would be a huge win. Probably won't get it, but it's possible. But if he doesn't and they can enrich, but they're just limited and they're tied up in some surveillance regime, in that case, at least the U.S. has stopped the free fall of non-proliferation, which I think is what existed prior to the war.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to try to put this in three buckets. I think for the United States, they're neither a winner nor a loser. It's just a draw. And it's a testament to how awesomely powerful the United States is that for a third time, it can go into the Middle East and bomb a bunch of shit and fundamentally nothing changed for Americans. Like, did we feel the war here? If the worst that comes from the war is that your gas prices went up a little bit, like, you're doing pretty well.
I live in California, so it was like a lot.
Okay, well,
But I noticed on
your choice.
But I noticed 5 minutes house, it was $3.70 a lot of gas prices. Not that big of a deal.
Bless your heart that you're paying $3.70 for gas. That's awful. Meanwhile, Iran is like in flames and everything else. Like, United States doing very well.
Fair.
Also, maybe is this finally the end of the U.S. fever dream in the Middle East? Did it take just such a stupid approach to the Middle East for future U.S. governments to be like, yeah, we're not going to do this anymore. There's really no payoff. And by the way, like, we've got Venezuelan oil, we've got the shale revolution. This is not that important for us. So I think for the United States, it's just kind of a meh, like, not winner, not loser, stupid decision. We didn't double down on it. That's net positive, but it doesn't actually do anything.
We should spend some time. I want to hear the other two buckets. President Trump's going to have infinite criticism for going into this. I mean, it was really, really not well thought out, and I'm being very generous with my choice of words. But like the fact that it was like, all right, I'm out.
Yeah.
Like, I wish more presidents did the, I'm out. Like, that's kind of how we got stuck with Vietnam, because it was like, we cannot show that we made a mistake. Right. President Trump almost, I feel like, exhausted us. Where there's a point where, like, what is it? Bill Simmons, our Lord and Savior, has this thing where it's the mom test. Some NBA player has become, like, huge because mom knows about it. Similarly with this, like, the mom test here is, does mom care about the nuances of the deal? Then Matt Gertken, our dear friend and cousin, is like, let me tell you, man, the mom test right now is like, I just hope this is over. I don't want to deal with it anymore. And that's Trump's skill at full display. He just got us so exhausted with this back and forth, that we're all like, yeah, I don't really care if we won or not.
Yeah, I think it's a rare personality trait in U.S. leaders and in any leader to not double down on a mistake, because you do something and then it doesn't go well, and the instinct is to double down on it. And you're right. Like, this was a mistake, and Donald Trump, I think, realized it pretty early, and I think he wanted to get out earlier, but he couldn't sell it, and he probably still hasn't sold it to the base. I think the midterms, he's going to get slaughtered.
It doesn't really matter. Like, it's going to get slaughtered anyways.
He's already thinking about how to not get prosecuted for tax fraud and corruption and building his library after the fact. You can see that with what he's focusing on with domestic policy. So he's already sort of in that next stage. But I just want to shout out Barack Obama, because I think he did a similar thing. When he did that red line against Syrian use of chemical weapons, and he said, if Syria uses chemical weapons, it's game on. United States is coming in. And Bashar al-Assad said, okay, I'm using chemical weapons. And Obama could have very easily, and I actually remember, we were all still at Stratford. I remember John Kerry going on television and thundering away, we will, we said this, we're
bellicose,
And the next day, Obama was like, my red line is not such a red line anymore. We're good. And Putin called him out for it. And some people, attributed Putin's moves in Ukraine to, I know the United States is now doing to help. I think Obama does not get enough credit for the same move, which was the red line thing.
I'll do the same view.
But we could have been in a war in Syria.
That's like, but comparing donuts and.
But to give Trump credit, though, he would have zero dark 30'd Assad.
Yeah.
And that has had ramifications.
Well, this is the strangest thing about the Iran.
No, he bombed Assad.
Yeah.
This happened early in
2017. But he means taking him out.
No, I mean, he would have made it disappear overnight. And of course, we were rewriting history because Obama didn't do that, because he was remembering Operation Eagle Claw and Carter, and he didn't want to be Cartered.
But wait. But why are we equating it? Like, he could have just shot some tomahawks.
Thrown a couple, yeah.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. He didn't double down on the mistake. I'm just giving some credit here. But we'll never know this, and hypotheticals are not super important or useful.
He didn't double down.
But if President Trump had zero dark 30'd the supreme leader back in January when he said help was coming, we might live in a very, very different world. We might be dealing with a very, very different Iran. And the strangest thing to me in all of this is that he felt he had tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of protesters in the street. He's even he's so riled up at night where he's like, we're coming to help.
Yeah.
And then somebody got in his head and said, hey, that's cool, but we need to get the aircraft carriers in place. We need to get the Marines rolling. Like, we need to build this up. And it's like, no, you don't. Just do the thing you did with Maduro. Yeah. That was brilliant. Just take him out while people are going for him and see what happens in Iran. And he didn't, but anyway, it's a hypothetical. The two other buckets I just want to mention. I think the Middle East is both a winner and a loser. And I think they're a loser because one of the things that I think, at least I learned from this, is that oil doesn't matter that much anymore. In the 70s and 80s, the oil intensity as a percentage of GDP was much higher. So when you have a crisis in the Middle East that is blocking Middle Eastern oil, the entire economy does quake. I've been thinking a lot about our early days of Stratfor because my first months as an intern, we were doing red teams on a potential US-Israeli strike on the Strait of Hormuz back in like 2010. And the conclusion was, this is not going to happen because Iran will close the Strait of Hormuz, and that would, bring catastrophe to the global economy. And that was the position that we came out with. And that was what I was operating under in March and in April, like waiting for that thing to happen. And I think the interesting thing here is that it didn't happen. And that tells us something about the importance of oil in the general economy globally. And that's bad news for Middle Eastern countries because the clock is ticking. I'm not saying that hydrocarbons are going away. I'm not saying we don't need oil and LNG and all these other things. I'm just saying you can close the Strait of Hormuz for 3.5 months and the world can be pretty much fine. That wasn't true in the 1970s. I think the Middle East could be winners, though, because if I'm right about the first thing, that finally the U.S. is done with its fever dreams in the Middle East, these countries actually have to work things out together.
Yes.
To your point, Iran and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, you all need to hold hands and sing Kumbaya because there's going to be a lot of competition now and prices for your commodities are going to go down. The future is not mining the Strait of Hormuz. The future is who has the safest, most secure, most reliable route to these oil supplies as they get to the global market, because countries will go get them elsewhere or they'll build renewables if they can't get them. And maybe ironically, like President Trump bungling it so much in the Middle East, we'll finally have these Middle Eastern countries saying, to your point, we can't trust the United States. We actually have to swallow our pride and be friends with our mortal enemies because the alternative is this chaos that we're seeing right now.
So I would agree on that point. I mean, that was happening before this. U.S. withdrawal from Iraq and from Afghanistan created impetus for Saudi Arabia and Iran to sit down without America present and be like, all right, like, how do we solve this problem? And that detente worked up until this reintroduction of American power into the region. I've compared on this podcast U.S. power in the Middle East like Fed doing QE. Like when the Fed expands its balance sheet, it hides all the warts in the economy, smooths things over, but you want to resolve those before they become huge problems. So I would agree with that. But the part that the lesson here is that we don't need oil. I mean, I would say you're correct factually that we're not in the 1970s anymore.
Yeah, it wasn't as bad as it would have been, but it was bad enough that they weren't willing to go all the way in the war.
And that's because we had more time. We had more cushioning. And, our good friend Rory Johnson, I kind of I had a back and forth with him privately. And I told him, the reason that the alarmist view was wrong is because Rory's view was so right. Rory was pointing out in late 2025 and early 2026 what a absolute glut of supply there was.
Yeah.
And so that's but I would say that that's a objective reality of the moment.
I'm just speaking I'm not saying the oil doesn't matter. I'm just saying when I was looking at this, I was still in 1970s, oil calculations.
Yeah.
And I have to update and say, actually, there's more cushion here.
But you know what? I'm most interested in the demand cushion that we didn't actually get to prove empirically. But I think there's about 5 million barrels of global demand that's much more elastic than people think.
Well, thank you. You just bumped set, and now I'm going to spike it. The winner in this conflict is China, and I'm going to give you 2 to 3 things. The first thing here is you've been asking for weeks, months on the podcast, and I have not had a good retort about what's China doing. Why isn't China bringing a bigger role? I want to read a tweet from this economic historian. Her name's Isabella Weber. She noted that a key idea in Chinese statecraft since ancient times is that the state has a responsibility to stabilize inherently unstable markets for essential commodities. That is one of the things that the Chinese government thinks is its responsibility for China.
Yeah, mandate of heaven. Dynasties fall when prices go too high.
Exactly. And I think if Xi Jinping was listening to you just now, he'd say, hey, put Marko on the phone. The thing that I did you see how much less oil China imported over this? Did you see that we basically dropped our imports to nothing? You're welcome.
Yes.
There wasn't cannibals and canisters because I stopped importing oil.
I
have
say,
renewables and all
thank
these
you, sir.
things.
Yes, no, that's true. Look, you're right. I mean, that
But they did it out of their own interest. They didn't do it to save America or save the world.
Course,
Or,
which is,
No, but they flex. And I would argue, this was the case during COVID as well.
Yeah.
And post-COVID,
Flexing would have been sending their navy to the Persian Gulf.
No, I agree.
That's our interpretation of a flex. Their interpretation of a flex is the mandate of heaven is now global. We must make sure that oil doesn't go too high.
But you know,
it's not just about us anymore. This is about the global commodities market. China will be the one that you can rely on. We will be the adult in the room. The other data point I want to show you, you might have seen this, government bonds in most of the West, yields have gone up considerably. They've gone down in China because institutional investors around the world are looking at Chinese government bonds.
I would disagree with
as
that.
a source of maybe stability or relative stability.
I would say there's definitely evidence that
To them.
Yeah, good luck to them. I'm fine. I'm just saying it's a data point.
No, look,
I would.
like China has expanded the liquidity and it's made its bonds more attractive for institutional investors. Fact, but its bond yields are going down because its economy is in a disinflationary spiral. It's not because its economy is robust. In fact, that's why yields are coming down in China for the same reason that yields were low during the 2010s when there was no inflation. We had what was referred to as jobless recovery and secular stagnation, which nobody really characterized as a great period of American economy from 2010 to 2017. By the way, that period of American low growth, low inflation led to populism of Donald Trump and populism in Europe. So the yields coming down, I don't think is a reflection of just external demand. It's also a reflection of just generally demand for bonds in an economy where there's like nothing else that you want to kind of own.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah.
Well, they tightened their capital controls during this affair. But what you're saying is, like you said, you want shelf life for the discussion, and what you're saying will be relevant in the coming years eventually, if they try to create more openness for internal investment from the outside. But I would just say two things. One, earlier we struck on how the U.S. didn't double down on this war like it did with Vietnam. That's because the U.S. doesn't perceive that there is a global rival. There is no Soviet Union where the U.S. has to demonstrate that it has this extraordinary resolve. So in fact, because the U.S. doesn't feel that way, it didn't have to show its resolve. It didn't have to double down. It's sort of like a playground. It's a sandbox. And I'm not saying it's a good thing because I think the U.S. is wasting resources. But I'm also saying China didn't demonstrate enough of a threat of an alternative world system that the U.S. felt like it had to plunge all the way through this and dominate the Middle East entirely, which is what it would have done if if that threat were perceived as more immediate. But the other thing is, on the Chinese side, the problem that they face is that when they grow their economy, they increase the price of commodities. And so they don't get to claim to the rest of the world that you get to thank us for the lower commodity price. It doesn't work that way. When they fire up their economy, they overproduce goods and they suck up commodities from everybody and they push prices up. And then they dump those goods on everybody else whose own manufacturing sectors didn't have problems. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is, even though China stepped aside and they certainly didn't get any mud on their face, they didn't get their hands dirty, they didn't make any mistakes, I'll give you that. But the problem is, I don't think it will pay off in terms of global court of opinion. People have a better view of China now, or a China that's more stable now. What they'll see is a China that can't project power in the Middle East, and a China that, just sort of was biding its time and waiting around for things to move on.
Sorry, that was not a comment on your analysis. Yeah. No, all I want to say is, I do think on one level where Jacob is absolutely right is if we show a chart of U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve leading into a conflict with the Middle East.
An American instigated conflict.
Yeah, American instigated. This is why I joke. China knew that President Trump was going to invade Iran before Trump did, because Chinese demand for oil was basically fake. That's what we know. That's what we know about China.
They were building. Yeah,
they were just building spare capacity over the last 18 to 24 months, whereas America didn't. Which is crazy because, in a way, President Trump correctly blamed Joe Biden for draining SPR when there was no energy crisis, by the way. Russian crude did not stop flowing into the global markets in 2022. So Joe Biden's wasteful spending.
Although Brent went higher than it ever did in this conflict.
But there was no loss of supply.
I agree it wasn't a crisis.
So
I agree it was all populist politics. I'm just saying.
Price manipulation, and it lasted for much longer than the conflict lasted. So it was unnecessary. So you drain the SPR to the bottom. Trump correctly blames Biden for that, but then does nothing for basically 18 months that he's in power, during which, okay, fine. So Joe Biden made a mistake. Check. Correct the mistake. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to just like invade Iran
Yeah,
and
yeah.
cause this Hormuz.
Well, it's a great example of how the U.S. has no strategic planning, and it's sort of a
That's what I'm getting at.
it's a populist
Yes.
democracy that's running wild because you would have no, I mean it is you would have wanted to build.
But somehow in the earlier part of this podcast, I presented that as a strength.
Well,
Consistency.
it's a ultimately it is a strength that the overall system remains resilient. But during
Yeah,
the period,
no. I was both making fun of myself and I stand by my.
Yeah, but me too though, because I think the democracies are very resilient. But I think that where they become less resilient is when they're in the thrall of a rigid ideology that pursues a policy without having built up its oil reserves. So we're going to attack Iran even though they're going to close the Strait of Hormuz and we haven't rebuilt our oil reserve. So that's
somehow.
that was an ideological decision
Yeah.
rather than so they didn't put things in line, and that could reflect the fact that you have these anti-establishment leaders, not much experience, they're sort of learning on the job, etc. Anyway, those things are threats to the stability of the state. They're threats to U.S. strategy, grand strategy overall. But I actually think that the resilience of the system will prevail. It's just that that's sort of like
It'll just be a fun ride. It'll be a fun ride and provide great content for Geopolitical Cousins. Sponsored by the White House.
Sponsored by global international death and suffering and everything. Oh, that's how.
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead. No. I just want to say I'm taking the opposite side of you guys on China's reputation over the next 5 years. Like I think you can pick at my Chinese government bond thing. You can pick at some of these other things, but like I
you
think
pick with me in facts.
no, but I'm saying in 5 years' time, I think China comes out of this reputationally better because China's the adults in the room. You can't depend on the United States. You can depend on China. And maybe you don't like what China does. Maybe China's practices are predatory, but you know exactly what they're.
I agree with you.
You know
Jacob,
price.
I agree with you. I just disagree that yields going down is a sign of foreigners buying the bonds.
Then I'll throw that one out. Then let's
go EVs, AI. Listen, look.
No, let's also just throw in the fact that who's the mediator of this deal?
Well, Pakistan.
Of
course.
China.
It's not Pakistan.
No,
Have a tool. But here's the thing. The issue is that, so China. You're correct that China is still presenting itself, and in fact they had lost the presentation of a responsible stakeholder.
Yeah.
But now they've gotten to kind of put that cloak back on and say, see, look, we're a responsible stakeholder. But the problem is I just don't think anyone's going to believe them because they're still going to face these pressures at home on their employment base, on their manufacturing.
That's where I would disagree a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So my colleague Mathieu Savary and I wrote this report on like multi-anchor currencies, whatever. And, there's this like concept of a reserve currency, like you need a Triffin dilemma. You need to pump out all this liquidity on these bonds. Your point about bonds. I actually don't think that that's the Chinese model. China's not trying to get you. That's American thinking.
Yeah.
That you need to have a lot of supply of. I think that what China has done is it's internalized the British Empire model. So British Empire did not have a current account deficit.
Yeah.
It had a current account surplus.
Yeah.
What the British Empire did is they would show up in your country and be like, hey, you know what? You don't need to make your own textiles. We'll do that over there, but we'll provide you with financing. We'll provide you with infrastructure, some technology. And so that's what China's doing. What China's doing, and that's why I agree with you, Jacob. I do think that China's reputation, it's like you're saying, is going to get better in the next 5 years. It's already been good. And it's Western view that like...
Here's the thing, but there was no risk that the UK, with its manufacturing manpower, would have overwhelmed the world of goods in the way that China runs the world.
No, but listen, when Gandhi rose up against the British Empire, he used the loom as a symbol because
and the Irish too,
right. But no, like so you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Eventually, well, first of all forms of domination, you rebel against it because, like my 17-year-old daughter's rebelling against my domination. Like this is like life. You're describing like life. And eventually that will happen to China as well. I'm just saying that, they are providing the global South. That's why your point that like, you're making a bet that China will have a better reputation. I'm going from a perspective it already has probably as good of a reputation as it will. You go to Brazil, you go to South Africa, you go to Malaysia, you go to Indonesia, you go to Saudi Arabia. Now, after this, you go to the Emirates. Who's building the pipeline to get out of the Hormuz to Fujairah?
I think they had to rehabilitate the wolf warrior.
They did, yes. Actually, that was Matt's forecast like 5 years ago. Yeah.
I think
that's that.
I think they put that to bed. I think they're the adults in the room.
No, actually, that's fair. Okay, so they had this spasm, the wolf warrior thing, And it really was disastrous for their diplomacy. They were supposed to be courting Europe and creating all these special relationships, not to mention the global South.
Yeah.
They blew it totally. Okay, now they've sort of, basically now America has acted like a wild enough dog that now China looks relatively
Chuck
better.
Norris diplomacy, rest in peace, legend.
But I'm making the point, though, that China never actually did anything that changed, right? So they look better relatively because the U.S. looks worse.
Yeah.
But they haven't actually caused the change of their own policies that in the coming years will warm hearts and minds. Now, to your point, Brazil, UAE, other countries, they do still benefit from China. But it's just that their manufacturing sectors are going to be under pressure, so their industry.
But that's the long game.
Yeah.
That's like you telling, hey, there's a downside to this relationship.
Yeah. But everyone knows that there is.
I mean, but here's the thing. As someone who comes from the global South, I'll tell you the other side. You know, like there's a whole lot of people telling the Serbs not to deal with the Chinese. And it's like, bro, like, okay, are you going to finance the railroads?
Right.
Are you going to, like,
but Serbia always would have.
If anyone in the Chinese Communist Party is watching this, our infrastructure in New Orleans is terrible.
Also,
please come rebuild it. We'll default on the debt later. It'll be great for everyone except for
it
you.
is.
Like,
I mean, Louisiana and Serbia
please,
do have similarities. You know what I mean? Also, sponsorship is still open. You can, this podcast is sponsored by the White House and the Communist.
just remember who was talking about how China's a winner in this when that sponsor.
But my point is,
comes in.
Look, I read a lot of stuff, right? And there was like all this criticism of African countries, of Serbia, of like, and it's like, all right, well then, like you show up with your railroad building companies and your pipeline build. Oh, that's right, you don't have any. China does, and that's why Matt, like the problem is a lot of countries in the world are at such a state of development, like they don't need Anthropic models.
No,
they need like pipelines and railroads and
China provides that. No, that's all very clear. And they will continue to do that. And I think that what that shows is that as long as they don't engage in their own belligerence, in the short-sighted, aggressive ideological belligerence, the way that Russia and the U.S. have, then they will continue to build this reputation that you say is rising. But here's the question to you guys, though. Why should we have this great faith as their power and their prestige rises in them exercising self-restraint? You know what I mean? They're just uniquely prudent and uniquely farsighted and wise, whereas all these other nations are such idiots because whenever any of the other nations have power and prestige, what do? They go and blow it by acting aggressively.
You're right. I think my biggest blind spot here is wishful thinking. And I don't think you have to go to the United States and Russia. It's Japan 2.0 on steroids with 1 billion plus people.
Yeah.
Like the dark chapter of that is that China looks like Japan in the early 1920s.
9-dash line.
And go back to the beginning of our discussion. They have AI that's going to create ideological disruption. You know what I mean? They have a debt deflation. So they have a hole in the heart of their economy that they can't fill. They're going to face ideological disruption. The democracies may not all be getting but they are going to apply a little more pressure. And the Communist Party has never dealt with this confluence of challenges.
If we need a little more fodder of anti-China, we just got to let Peter. We gotta let Peter come in here. Come on, like he's coming. He's warming up. He's out there like shadow boxing.
He's stretching. He's doing some yoga.
He's coming. Listen. All I'm gonna say is like you don't need to go in the 19th century, 20th to find where power got to their head.
Yeah.
2008 happens. Every idiot is writing op-eds in the Financial Times about how it's the Beijing consensus.
Yeah, the Beijing consensus.
It got into their head 10 years ago. And they started doing 9-dash line, building islands in the middle of nowhere, putting missiles on them, and wolf warrior diplomacy. So when does it get to their head? Maybe literally right now. Maybe now it gets to their head. Because again, like in 2008, it was like the Western world is crumbling. China said, okay, cool, it's our moment. Hold my beer. And then what happened was what happened. And they had to curb all these things to be smarter. Now, have they learned their lesson? Maybe this administration did, but if you get a change of, guards, maybe they forgot those lessons. So
one thing that might help to tie all this together is one thing they probably have witnessed watching both Ukraine and Iran defend themselves against much greater, ostensibly greater powers, is that it's a very painful process. So if China internalizes that, they continue to play a longer game on Taiwan, which is, I imagine, what we think, then that could reinforce this moment that they could enjoy.
Yeah. All right. Before we bring in the closer, we got to do a couple minutes on sports. We just had the NBA Finals. New York Knicks champions for the first time in 53 years. Viewers, listeners, if you're expecting me to have good sports take, I pride myself on my sports takes being bad, as my geopolitical takes are good. This was another example. I said it was what? Spurs with a sweep, I believe was what I said. I almost had the exact inverse. So I am your Jim Cramer of sports analysis. If I say one thing, you should probably go the exact opposite direction. Marko, you said it was Knicks in 6.
That's right.
We've also got the World Cup going on. So let's spend 5 or 10 minutes to close out on the NBA Finals, on the World Cup, on Donald Trump showing up at Madison Square Garden for Game 3. Like we have a lot to sort here in a limited amount of time.
By the way, that was the game the Knicks lost. Right?
It was the game.
And then my favorite was when Trump was like, "You booed the anthem, God punished you."
I also just want to say one thing, because it actually reflects back to our AI conversation, because, everybody's been talking about it feels great in New York. It's New York, the best city ever. Like, can't believe it. And I lived in New York for a year. Did either of you live in New York ever? No. I like, there are good parts of New York, bad parts of New York. But I'm like so confused by that take, because how many hundreds of thousands of dollars did you have to pay to get into Madison Square Garden to watch this game? They shut down all the watch parties because the president wanted to be there. And even after he was gone, they didn't do it. So the fact that the proletariat is out there in the streets because they can't get into the actual arena because those tickets are hundreds of thousands.
It's like World Cup too.
That's great. Woohoo, New York. Great feeling. It's like, great. You are literally celebrating like the unraveling of our socioeconomic fabric. It's like terribly depressing. Anyway, sorry. Why did you pick the Knicks? Or take it any direction?
Oh, I picked the Knicks because actually, you know what? We should just splice Mr. Rasheed Wallace's great wisdom on this.
We're going to splice it in right now. So that's a note to Jacob into a video. I've got a video for you to splice in right here.
But yeah, so that's why the Knicks won. I mean, like, you can't have a team with like 22-year-olds win. It doesn't work. It's not going to work. You need, there's a difference between gym weight room strength and grown man with kid strength, and that's why they lost. I don't really have a geopolitical take on that, but that's what happened. The price of tickets thing is interesting because the World Cup is the same.
That's just gouging.
But at the same time, like stadiums, people are saying stadiums are empty. They were empty for a couple of games, but actually, like, my own eyes see that, Newark was like New Jersey. I think, who was it? Switzerland versus, I think it was some game. It was like packed 80,000 people in there, and people are paying. So I think there's two ways to put it. We talk about K-shaped economy and how there's like all this income inequality and so on, but I do think that we might also be witnessing end of the cycle or near end of the cycle. The last, 6 years have enriched a lot of people. So yes, it's also kept a lot of people without anything, like no gains. They didn't have assets. Those assets did not inflate. But when I see like 80,000 people pack a random game between like, Switzerland and Qatar, and the cheapest ticket was like $2,000. Smells like maybe it's been a.
I don't have a take on basketball. Like I'm the Kansan I'm the only Kansan who would rather talk about the World Cup soccer. But I will say this though, beyond the cycle, I think in the age of AI, I think sports and entertainment are just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So the insanity that we have around now, tickets, prices, and all these events is just going to get
so what you said
even more extreme.
I agree with you, but I want
celebration of the human body. Like the human body will do
all the human experience.
The human body and human experience and the live experience will be irreplaceable and will rise in value because of
I've made this point here too.
Expansion of supply for non-human.
It's the only thing left that unifies those, which is why there was a UFC fight on the White House lawn. This is bread and circus.
No, but listen,
we are late.
It's more than that. I would even go as far to say, you said something like AI generated art will not, excite us. It won't wow us. Well, let's say
AI will never have taste.
But let's say they
go out there.
Yeah, it'll get bad art. It'll put us dog.
Well, let's just say you guys are wrong. Let's just say you guys are absolutely wrong, and it will. I still don't care, and I'll tell you. Like the example I used on this pod before is like Magnus, the number 1 ranked chess champion in the world, like makes bank. Chess has never been more popular, partly because of COVID, partly because the Queen's Gambit, chess.com, all this stuff. I just watched a documentary about Magnus's tiff with that like young American upstart who like quote unquote might have cheated or whatever. I just watched a documentary with all 3 of my kids. We loved it. We couldn't stop it. Humans are going to watch humans, period, end of story. It's never going to change. And so I'm not too worried. You're absolutely right. And as everything becomes like, digitized, the human experience will be will rise in value.
Well, not only that, but like think about the arts, right? Commercial art benefits from AI because everyone can now brand a lot better. You know, like you were some small business, you needed a banner.
Yeah,
You can but fine art actually rises in value because commercial art just got so much cheaper from the oversupply, and that's the key. So what gets destroyed is the Andy Warhol notion that you can pretend you're fine art by producing commercial art. That's going to get wiped out. But real fine art, like Renaissance fine art, will actually go up.
Look at diamonds
not just,
too.
but even modern people with
Another example of this is like real diamonds and lab-grown diamonds.
I bought my wife a lab-grown diamond.
So those are exactly the same.
Exactly.
Exactly the same. The price of real diamonds has not been impacted negatively.
Just a little bit, yeah.
A little bit,
Right.
but like it like went down and then up again.
And up again, yeah.
And why? Well, because
they just tier it.
Because people really like,
and Keisha,
slave labor in Africa, bringing those diamonds out of the ground. They need that
Look at
authentic
Jacob-
experience.
I bet you that's what Jacob said to his lovely wife. He's like,
I knew
"Baby,
my wife well enough to know that she would have had me pay a premium for
Yeah.
the man-made one because she didn't want the
That's
blood diamond.
There we go.
TIA, bro. I do have a geopolitical take on basketball a little bit, which is to say, Knicks versus Spurs. Jalen Brunson is not supposed to be able to win that contest because the Spurs are obviously more talented. The Spurs are the U.S. They've got Victor. By the way, Michael Jordan is safe. Victor's not going to be the best player in the history of the league.
He's 22 though.
It doesn't matter. Jordan didn't have a moment quite like this, like failing like this in that manner, sort of on the global stage. But Jalen is like Ukraine. He figured out the drones. He figured out what to do. Ananobi is the drone coming in to put the tip in. Like New York was able to show you, to your point, that it's actually, if you have a cohesive team, you can beat talent, which I think is one of the lessons.
I think it's experience. I think it's as Rasheed Wallace says, like you gotta have gone through some things in your life.
Yeah.
Failures. And I also think that like we need to stop thinking of athletes as a particular type of a body type. Like Jalen Brunson is not just like shorter, he's also kind of flabby, honestly. Like, he's got that like Paul Pierce build, but shorter. And yet, boom, like 45 in a closing game.
Yeah.
It's all about angles. It's all about angles often in sports. And I think that's why team sports are so compelling because you can't just be in a gym and be more fit. There's more to it that goes into it. You got to be a good team leader. You got to know how to sacrifice. You got to have skill. And I think that's why, it's incredible. Incredible victory by the Knicks.
I also just think there's an amazing symmetry between the San Antonio Spurs when they were playing the Heat in that first series. They lose that series because even though they have Tim Duncan on the team, he's not there to get the rebound off the miss, and then Ray Allen gets the three. In the Game 3 comeback in this series, Wembanyama is out there guarding Jalen Brunson, so Anunoby can just scoop in and get the rebound, and that's like probably the reason.
Well, Game 5 too, Mitchell Robinson. I don't know if you saw him.
It just boxed him out into the.
And that's again going to Rasheed Wallace's point. I mean, like the guy walked
him out, but it's just two examples of the Spurs, even though they have league-defining big men, and yet they can't do the basic thing of get the rebound. And this is like something we talk about all the time with Victor. It's like, get some rebounds, man. Stop shooting threes. Just go to the basket and lay it up. And I think there's a geopolitical lesson in that too. Like I think the United States, in some sense, all the talk about, we're trying to drain threes from half court. Why don't we just make some layups? Why don't we just post up in the paint and do the things we're good at and like dunk it? Because anytime you throw up a lob to the United States, you'll dunk it. We get into a problem and we're trying to, bomb from halfway across the world.
It's a stretch, Jacob.
Oh, I'm stretching,
But Wemby is kind of a stretch guy. So like, there we go.
No, there's some truth to it. There's this desire for like, the U.S. is so complex now and the population just keeps lurching between political parties looking for some quick fix. And the leader, there's an imperial presidency because Congress is constantly gridlocked, and so it is like that. It's like, let's just do this. Each new individual who becomes a phenomenon is going to solve all the country's problems with 1-3 from half court.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's not the right way to think about it. But I think that can change, when there's a generational shift and we stop looking for that Messiah figure. Because who's looking for the Messiah figure? The older voters are looking for the Messiah, because this is a theme that we come back to, but like they're close to the end, right? They want the nation to end up in a great spot as they're on their way out.
But it also turns out the Messiah was there the whole time. It was Jalen Brunson. This is very niche, but I don't know if you saw, like they were putting, they have pictures of the old Chabad Rebbe, who the Chabad people think was the Messiah. They were putting, superimposing pictures of Jalen Brunson on the pictures of the Rebbe that are usually out there, and he's the Lord and Savior of New York City. Like the hero that we needed was actually the 5'11" guy who nobody trusted and was drafted in the second round. That's very alien from France.
Also,
Very fitting.
won a ring before Luka.
He did.
So
Time's ticking, Luka. All right. Any last words before we take a break and then bring in the heavy hitters?
No, I think the last word should go to the World Cup.
Okay, please.
And I'll just say, if what you said is true about cohesion of a team, being able to triumph over like exorbitant talent, if that works out, then the U.S. could actually perform better than people expect, because that was the most cohesive U.S. team I've ever seen.
Wow.
Again, now Paraguay was running around like a chicken with its head cut off. So, maybe, but it was incredible seeing an American team pass that way.
The zag of all zags, the U.S. will do well in the World Cup.
Well, they're not going to do that well. But listen, don't take this, let's get out of control here. I'm just saying.
I think a lot of things are coming together for that forecast to be true. And I mean, hosts tend to outperform expectations. That's what our model showed from our last podcast we did.
I'll say, the team that scores more goals is going to win the match.
I think we ended that. That's wisdom right there.
The U.S. scored more goals than they've ever scored in a World Cup game. We'll see. I mean, look.
Mazel. Good job, guys. Keep it up.
Not wrong.
Not wrong. All right. Cheers.
Thanks.